Welcome to the 5th episode of the TerpTalk Podcast presented by Viner Consulting. This is your host, Mason the Intern Viner.
And your co-host, Jordan Viner.
And before we get things started here on the TerpTalk Podcast, I would like to wish Jordan a happy birthday.
Thank you, Mason.
So, today on the TerpTalk Podcast, we will be talking about FAU because this podcast, as you can see, is coming to you from Boca Raton, Florida, and FAU. And then we will move on to our Week 3 and 4 Maryland season football previews with UCF and Minnesota.
We have some very stark contrast opinions on those two games, so it should be a good debate.
So, Jordan, let's kick it off with FAU.
Well, I looked at FAU 2 or 3 years ago as an actual school option for me, and it is a very nice, very Boca campus. As you can see, the football facility was brand new when I was looking here, and it looks gorgeous.
Hey, Mason, I hate to break in, but as the cameraman, why aren't there any football stripes on the field?
Well, the MLL's Florida launch plays here at FAU, and multiple Terps are on that team. Lacrosse is a building sport down here in Boca, as FAU is looking to add a D1 program. Yes, that part was shot at the Florida Atlantic University in Boca, and you can watch that part of the podcast on Wayne Terp. So moving on here, we're going to talk about FAU football for a few minutes that just recently made a big hire.
Well, that big hire is, of course, Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin has had a very, let's say, shaky run in his football career, but is undoubtedly a huge name in the coaching world and has decided to take his talents to FAU. Now, FAU has had a spotty run at football. Their coach for the first 10 or so years of their existence was Howard Schnellenberger, the legendary coach that started the U movement in Miami and had a good run at Louisville. So they've been spotty in the football run. Let's see if it turns around with Lane Kiffin.
Well, once Lane Kiffin decided to go to FAU, immediately a few four-star recruits committed to FAU for this upcoming season. So you immediately see that Lane Kiffin can start a movement at FAU to get some good recruits there.
Well, the movement may be similar to the movement for Maryland fans, the DMV to UMD. South Florida is arguably the richest college football area for recruiting in the world. And that's how Miami started their whole U movement in the 80s and 90s. And FAU hopes to be able to channel that with getting some of these South Florida kids to stay closer to home. Now, obviously, they're not the only game in town. There's Florida, FSU, Miami. Even USF and UCF pull recruits that FAU would otherwise have a chance at. So they have a tough road to do it, but I think they can do it.
Well, it's even tougher. It's not like guys from South Florida only go to Florida State, Florida, and Miami. They also have every other team in America comes to Southern Florida to recruit because it's such a rich area. I mean, there are a lot of Terps from down here in South Florida on the roster for this upcoming season. So it's not only the teams from Florida, it's everybody from Florida plus the rest of the college football world.
And that sums up for FAU. They have a tough road, but let's see if they can do it. We really don't know until Lane Kiffin gets in the groove here, assuming he stays here for more than a couple seasons. They could really build something. They do have very nice facilities. The campus is gorgeous. We'll see if they can pull it together. So if we go to the Maryland stuff for this podcast, the number one story is obviously Jamarco Pickett going to Georgetown.
Jamarco Pickett took the easy road here. Georgetown promised him that he was going to be a starter. Maryland couldn't make that. Maryland wanted to add Jamarco Pickett to be great. So when you're looking at this decision from a college kid that thinks he has a chance at the NBA, can you really blame him for picking Georgetown?
Yeah, and I know a lot of Maryland fans are going to be mad at Jamarco Pickett, but Mason's right. I have a hard time faulting him here. If he wants to play and be the guy, then Maryland was not the right choice for him. Georgetown was. But if he wanted to win and really build something, you'd have to say Maryland was a better choice. Georgetown seems to have been on the downslope now for 5 or 6 years. They are struggling to rebuild as a program. They lost Sean Obi to Maryland in April. They just seem to struggle to get guys now. I understand Patrick Ewing has huge name recognition, even in the younger generations, but I have a hard time seeing them win, even with Jamarco Pickett.
He chose, I'm going to be the guy, I'm going to have a chance at the NBA over a team that in 2018, if they pick up some of these recruits, can win a championship with Jamarco Pickett on the team. It was just kind of a selfish decision, but in the college basketball world now, it's all about making the NBA, and he made the choice that has him with a better chance to make the NBA as being the guy.
Well, I don't see Jamarco Pickett as an NBA prospect, honestly. I know that might seem a bit harsh, but 2017 is not considered a great recruiting class. It's actually considered a pretty weak one, and it's surrounded by 2016 last year and 2018 next year.
But that means that Jamarco Pickett, if he has a good season this year, can be a one-and-done first or second-round draft pick and make it to the NBA if he has a good season. That's why I think he chose Georgetown over Maryland.
Well, the Big East isn't what it once was. I have a hard time seeing him rise above the ranks because A is probably the biggest factor here. He's a 6'7" power forward. The NBA has no room for 6'9" power forwards anymore. He's not an NBA build type of guy unless he can learn how to shoot really fast. I don't see him as an NBA type player. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't see it happening for him.
I think it's all about him developing the ability to dribble, because he can hit the step back, but if he can learn how to dribble, he can probably flex to the 3 in the NBA, and, a 6'7" small forward, that can be a good position for a guy like Jamarco Pickett.
Yeah, you might be right. So, if we look at it from Maryland's perspective here, well, Jamarco Pickett going to Georgetown doesn't kill our chances for next season, but it doesn't help them either.
Well, when this happened, immediately I said, this opens up the 2018 recruiting class back to guys like Cameron Reddish and Keldon Johnson. It really opened up a lot of things back for the 2018 class because Jamarco Pickett, he would have added a lot for this season, but as you said, a 6'7" power forward, where is there space for that? He's kind of a flex 3 or 4, doesn't have a real position. Now it opens up back to this great 2018 recruiting class. It opens up another roster spot for next season.
Well, the 2018 class overall in basketball is heralded as a fantastic class. If you've been watching ESPNU last couple of days, there's been a tournament in Las Vegas that's showcasing how good this class really is. Speaking of which, Jalen Smith had a great game a couple of days ago in that tournament. And Mason's right. Cameron Reddish and Keldon Johnson, both of which are not Maryland leans, but they both have Maryland in the running, and they're both superstar potential guys. Cameron Reddish especially is a top 5 guy who I think draws some comparisons in my mind to a younger Rudy Gay or someone like that who is a supreme shooter and a good defensive player as well. There's a lot of potential in that class. If we can get just one of those guys, because we didn't get Jamarco Pickett, it's worth it to me.
Well, it affects the season, but in my mind, I like Bruno Fernando at the 4. He's tough. He plays like a Big Ten basketball player. I think that's something that Maryland has lacked these past few years, is a really rough and tough guy down low. Jamarco Pickett really, honestly, was not going to be that. He would have given Maryland another chance at the wing. But, they weren't expecting him to come till he decommitted from Ole Miss. It's just, we're back to what we thought was going to happen at the beginning of this month.
That kind of sums up Jamarco Pickett. We hope, we wish we would have gotten him, but it doesn't kill us that we didn't. That's our TerpTalk analysis.
Moving on here, we're going to do our Maryland versus UCF football preview, but first, remember to listen to the Sports Maven, 9 a.m., 1300, CBS Sports Radio in Baltimore to hear Bruce round up all of the week's sports news. That is the Sports Maven, 9 a.m., 1300, CBS Sports Radio in Baltimore, or on the radio.com app. So, last season, Maryland played UCF in one of the closest games that the Terps played all year. A double overtime victory for the Terps, 30-24. What are we looking at this year?
Well, UCF and Maryland have both changed a lot since last season. They both have second-year coaches. UCF has Scott Frost, who had a phenomenal college career at Nebraska, won the John Unitas Golden Arm Award for a quarterback. He is just a fantastic college football player, but unfortunately he didn't really pan out in the NFL. He lasted 6 seasons playing for the Jets, the Browns, and the Bucks. And he was under some of the greatest coaches of all time. He was coached at Bill Walsh during his time at Stanford, where he didn't really play. Transferred to Nebraska, where he played under one of the greatest college football coaches of all time, and Tom Osborne. And in the pros, his coaching didn't take a drop off at all. He was under Bill Parcells at the Jets, Bill Belichick at the Browns, and John Gruden at the Bucks. He's had a great run of coaches in his career. He was under Chip Kelly at Oregon, and now he's the head man at UCF.
Well, UCF had a similar season to the Terps last year. They finished 6-7, which is the same record as Maryland had last season. But this year, there are a lot of question marks. Starting with the lifeblood of the team, which is the quarterback position. As of now, UCF is considered a five-way battle at the quarterback position with the incumbent Mackenzie Milton. He ended up being hurt at the end of last season. They also have two freshmen, Noah Vedral and Derek Mack Jr., who are also big guys in the running for this quarterback position. But if you move down to the offensive line, that was the weakest spot on all of last year's team. I was reading the sports preview for them by Athlon Sports, and it said that all three of the quarterback injuries that this team endured last season were because the offensive line just could not stop anybody.
The offensive line is the position you maybe least want to hear is the weakest spot in your team because it affects the entire offense. You can't get your passing game off because you can't protect the quarterback, which UCF had big problems with last year, and you also can't run the ball because, well, for obvious reasons, you can't run the ball. But their defense, however, was actually pretty good last year.
Yeah, they had the AAC Defensive Player of the Year in Shaquem Griffin. He had 11.5 sacks last season, and he is back for his senior year. And the defensive line is the strongest spot on this team. They returned starters all across the board, and they were the 46th ranked total defense last season, and they're looking to improve on that. The only spot where the UCF defense could be considered weak would be in the defensive backfield, but as we said last week, the Terps receivers aren't looking too good either, so I think this is going to be a really evenly matched game with the Terps offense versus the UCF defense.
Which means, of course, that we hope the UCF offense struggles. Maryland's pass rush is maybe the strongest part of their defense, and hopefully with UCF's weak offensive line, we can leverage that into forcing some sacks and some turnovers from the UCF quarterback, whoever that may be. So Maryland, in my mind, this game has got to be about Maryland capitalizing on whatever mistakes UCF's offense will make.
Yeah, I think it's about that, but I also think it's about Maryland's speed rush game with Lorenzo Harrison, Ty Johnson, and Anthony McFarland really to get going. Because if you can get around the edges on this UCF defense, you can make some big runs. And it's going to be whoever that Maryland quarterback might be week 3, playing a good game, going through the progressions and making the right throws, whether they be short passes or deep balls. You got to complete your passes when you get the time in the pocket.
Well, this brings up something else, which is a lot has changed since our roster preview last week. We don't know who the quarterback will be, really. We don't now. Mason thinks it's going to be Tyrell Pogrom. I think I'm going to have to agree with him. And if that's the case, I think Maryland may struggle. You know, Pogrom is more of a running quarterback than a passer, and I think that may damage Maryland's chances in this game.
Well, you're looking for the steps forward with Tyrell Pogrom. He has shown the arm strength to be able to really throw the deep ball, but he really just looked uncomfortable as a pocket passer last season. You're looking for him to develop from that freshman to the sophomore season to really become a better passer.
Well, I'd say the Maryland offensive line is the second strongest component on this team behind running backs. And with that in mind, I feel like in this game, we may be able to take advantage of that. If we can hold back their pass rush and let the defensive backfield of UCF sit for a while, Maryland's receivers may be able to take advantage of that. I'm especially looking for DJ Moore to be able to stretch the field against this weaker defensive backfield.
Well, I wouldn't say the defensive backfield for UCF is particularly weak. It's just the weakest spot on their defense. So we're looking for Maryland's prime receiver, DJ Moore, to make big plays. Now, UCF is a good football team. They're looking at about second in the AAC at the end of the year, possibly conference championship contenders. But this game is supposedly a huge test for the rest of their season because it's Scott Frost's first big game in his second season, and they're really looking for the offense, which plays by volume. They just want to run a lot of plays against your defense. They're looking for Scott Frost in his second year to solidify that offense because last year it had a lot of ups, but it also had a lot of way downs.
Well, as we get closer to the end of the shot clock here, we need to mention that UCF still has that Oregon mentality that Scott Frost brought over from his Oregon days. They just want to run as many plays as possible, as Mason said, and confuse the defense. That could damage us because of our inexperience in the defensive backfield. And I think if UCF's going to win that game, that's what they're going to do it. They're going to confuse the defensive backfield, and their offensive line is going to be able to hold up just enough to win this game. So with that in mind, I still think Maryland's going to win. I have us winning this game 38-27 to push us to 2-1 in my football preview.
I got the Terps advancing to 3-0 in this game because Maryland's defensive pass rush will be able to get after the UCF quarterback, whoever that may be, and Maryland's run game, despite the fact that UCF's strongest suit is the defensive line, the Terps' run game will really get it going. Pigrome will make some good passes. I got the Terps 45-24. So we're going to move on here to our Week 4 Maryland football preview, the first Big Ten game of the season, Maryland at Minnesota. But first, check out Wayne Terp on YouTube to see all the video that we did at FAU this week, and to check out John Tillman's speech at the Bayhawks championship celebration about the Terps and what it meant to win this season. That is Wayne Terp on YouTube. Jordan, Maryland versus Minnesota last season. What does that say to you?
Well, I know what it says to you, which is nothing. Mason completely discounts last season's game against Minnesota because Tyrell Pigrome was thrown into the game and he wasn't ready, and we just looked off. Now, my counter to that is Minnesota had the same situation. Mitch Leidner, who is Minnesota's quarterback for 2 years, was injured on the first drive of the game last year. That means Connor Rhoda, who had thrown one pass in his career before this game, was thrown into the game, and he had never played before. Tyrell Pigrome was actually better prepared for this game than Connor Rhoda.
That is not true. Connor Rhoda was a junior redshirt in this game. Tyrell Pigrome was a true freshman playing in his first Big Ten game against his first Big Ten defense. In Minnesota, that's a really tough defense. They got some big guys. They mainly played the juniors and seniors. And Pigrome just wasn't ready for a Big Ten defense.
Well, that was Connor Rhoda's first Big Ten game as well. I know he's a junior redshirt, but that was his first run. And regardless, Maryland still had a horrible game, okay? They had 4 turnovers, and Minnesota thrived on those turnovers. Last season may not matter as much still because of the coaching change.
Well, the Maryland-Minnesota game last season ended up 31-10. Maryland just got beat up by the Minnesota Rough. But this season is different for Minnesota. Tracy Claeys said last season that it was either going to be him or they're going to let his guys play because of a sexual assault allegation made against 12 players on the team. The school wanted to suspend 12 guys. Tracy Claeys said, "These are my guys, and I'm going to stand up for them." It ended up meaning his job after a 9-4 season. But now they brought in PJ Fleck. And PJ Fleck is a guy that's all about his style. He wants it to be all about him and his guys. He's got that whole row the boat thing. It's going to be about him. It's going to be his system or the highway. And we saw this at Maryland a few years ago when Randy Edsall came in after Ralph Friedgen. It was just a complete style change. That's what I see happening at Minnesota. PJ Fleck wants it to be his way.
I agree with you on PJ Fleck's style versus Tracy Claeys, but I think it's going to carry over better. Well, maybe not overall, but in this game, I don't see it mattering much because of one reason. Minnesota is a solid brick team. They run the ball extremely well. They have a powerhouse rushing attack that featured 3 running backs over 350 yards, 2 over 650, and 1 over 1,000. And every one of those guys is returning this season. They also didn't lose a lot of offensive line. They have a lot of continuity up front. They just look to me like an experienced Big Ten team that will grind Maryland into fine turtle dust and send us back to College Park.
I don't see that. I see this team having a big problem with PJ Fleck. Tracy Claeys, as I already said, he stood up for them when it meant his job. PJ Fleck wants to come in, and he wants it to be all about him and his style. These guys had a great thing going with Tracy Claeys, and I just don't see that continuing. I see this team having a little bit of a problem going into PJ Fleck's system, but you are right. This team can run the football. PJ Fleck likes to run the football. It is really up in the air for me. You're going to see it in the first 3 weeks of the season if this team gels with PJ Fleck or not.
Well, that's kind of hard to say because of who they play. Minnesota starts at the season playing Buffalo, at Oregon State, and at home against Middle Tennessee State before starting out the season against us. Now, one thing I am grateful for in this game is its timing. Maryland is playing its first Big Ten game, and so is Minnesota. I'm very happy Minnesota's not getting any Big Ten experience before we are. I'm also happy the game's September versus November, where the temperature would be a factor. Now, with that in mind, this playing field will be a little bit better, but I see Minnesota as a sleeper in the Big Ten West, which this year I think will be a bit off.
Well, this season, Connor Rhoda, it's, as you said, it's his first real go. So, are we going to see a lot of question marks at the Minnesota quarterback position? Can Connor Rhoda really get it done?
Oh, I see Connor Rhoda as the absolute starter going into this season. There's not much talk about who else could start. I know they have a sophomore quarterback who they think has some high ceilings, but Connor Rhoda looks like he's a starter. They look very sure of themselves, as strange as that may be going into a new season. Minnesota does not seem to have any issues transitioning. Now, obviously, we won't really know that until the season starts, but their defense is really good too. They have a great linebacker in Jonathan Sesselton, who had 80 tackles last year, and has been talking to PJ Fleck a lot about how he can help him win over the guys. They also have Steven Richardson, a 300-pound defensive tackle, who is a great run stopper and a great pass rusher. He got 7 sacks last season. They just are a deep defense. Now, their defensive backfield is a little bit weaker, but not so much that our receiving core, which is, as we keep saying, a little bit weak, can take advantage of. I just don't see us matching up well with them. I have Minnesota just hammering us in this game.
Well, it's harder for me to see different when you look at the numbers, but there's a lot going on in Minnesota. Will the transition to PJ Fleck go well for the Golden Gophers, or will it be more of a Randy Edsall thing where the team just quits? I don't really know. It seems to be that the team is on board with PJ Fleck, but nobody knows till week 1. That's just college football for you. This is going to be tough because I see Maryland putting it all in to stop the rush. I feel the Maryland defense is going to flex to Melvin Kane and go 4 guys hands in the dart, play Jesse Antibodem somewhere else to do better against the rush, and make Connor Rhoda throw the football. That's the only way the Terps are going to win this game, is if they make Connor Rhoda make the big plays down the stretch.
I think you may be right, and I'm interested in this Minnesota team. I like Minnesota a lot. I feel like they have a chance at the Big Ten West, as I said earlier. So we're running out of time here, so let's go with our final predictions. Mason, what's your final thought in this game?
My final thought on this game is somehow Maryland gets it done. I couldn't tell you how, but that's just my gut feeling on this game. I just don't see the PJ Fleck system working with the Minnesota football players, and I see DJ Durkin. I think Maryland's a really surprise team. I see DJ Durkin's guys getting really pumped up for this game because of what happened last year and really bringing the punch. I got the Terps by the last-second field goal by Adam Green, 24-21 Terps.
I just don't see it. I really don't. I'd like to say that we could play up to Minnesota's level, but I don't know if we will. I think Minnesota, PJ Fleck, as we've seen in the past, is known for getting so much out of his guys. It's ridiculous, especially with Western Michigan last year. I think part of that carries over. I have Minnesota winning this game 38-20.
Well, that's the contrast that we promised early in this podcast, and that's going to do it for the 5th episode of the TerpTalk Podcast presented by Viner Consulting. You can check out Viner Consulting for all your technology needs at oneviner, VIENER.com. Thanks for listening, and next week on the TerpTalk Podcast, we will be previewing Maryland at Ohio State and Maryland versus Northwestern. And make sure to vote on our polls at terptalk.com. This last week, you guys predicted Maryland's starting quarterback to be Caleb Henderson. Then week 1, you guys had Texas beating the Terps. Week 2, you had Maryland topping Towson. Week 3, Maryland beating UCF. And week 4, you had the Terps beating Minnesota. So, Jordan, the Maryland fans agree with me instead of you on Maryland versus Minnesota.
They are wrong. Anyway, we broke more records on viewership this week, so thank all you guys for listening, and we'll see you next week. Mason, take us home.
Thank you guys for listening to this week's TerpTalk Podcast. We'll be back next week with episode 6 of the TerpTalk Podcast presented by Viner Consulting. Thanks for listening.
You don't even know. I can make your hands clap.